Pressure is mounting on Nicolas Maduro. The U.S. imposes tough sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry in a move aimed at forcing the president to step down. But will he, and how far will Washington go to change the government in Caracas? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Richelle, Carey. Venezuela's economy has been in crisis for years. Hyperinflation is skyrocketing. Millions of people have left the country, and the president hasn't been able to fix it. Now the U.S. is hitting Nicolas Maduro even harder where it hurts in a bid to get him out of office. It's imposed sanctions on Venezuela's state oil company, blocking $7 billion in assets, and is recognizing the opposition leader, Juan Guaido, is interim president. Washington's called on the military, which is so far standing by Maduro, to accept a peaceful transfer of power and warned otherwise there could be consequences.
Now is the time to stand for democracy and prosperity in Venezuela. I reiterate that the United States will hold Venezuelan security forces responsible for the safety of all U.S. diplomatic personnel, the National Assembly, and President Guaido. Any violence against these groups would signify a grave assault on the rule of law and will be met with a significant response.
The Treasury took action against Venezuela's state-owned oil company, PDVSA, to help prevent the further diversion of Venezuela's assets by former President Maduro. The United States is holding accountable those responsible for Venezuela's tragic decline. We will continue to use all of our diplomatic and economic tools to support interim President Guaido, the National Assembly, and the Venezuelan people's efforts to restore their democracy.
President Maduro responded by vowing to take legal action against the U.S.
This shows that their objective is to take our riches. What is the objective of the government of the United States? Take the properties from Venezuela, the riches of Venezuela, Venezuela's money, and later on they aspire to take away our country.
Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves, even bigger than Saudi Arabia, but it is rapidly running out of money to pump it out of the ground. It was producing more than 3 million barrels of oil a day in the late 1990s, but output's been down by more than half. Sales dropped last year to just over 1 million barrels, the lowest in almost 30 years. Venezuela's biggest customer is the U.S., which accounts for around 40% of its exports, 500,000 barrels a day. The U.S. says sanctions will cost $11 billion in lost revenues. But even without sanctions, oil production is expected to decline dramatically this year, with forecasts of a drop of 300,000 barrels a day. Let's bring in our guests now. Here in Doha is Jairo Lugo-Ocando, Director of Executive Education and Graduate Studies at Northwestern University here in Qatar. And from Jaipur, India, by Skype is Charles Shapiro, former U.S. Ambassador to Venezuela. And from London is Diego Moya Ocampos. He is a Principal Analyst for Country Risk at IHS Markit and the Americas team. And we appreciate all of you for joining us. Diego, I want to start with you. How significant are these sanctions?
Well, they're pretty significant. Venezuela's main source of revenue is the oil sector. It represents 25% of GDP, 50% of fiscal revenues, and 97% of foreign exchange. So certainly, sanctions on Venezuela's oil sector is a game changer.
In the past hour, there's been some more clarification from the U.S. that says that they will actually allow Venezuela's opposition to still have access to certain accounts and certain properties. So, Charles, do you expect there to be more clarity and more tweaking about these sanctions going forward?
Well, I hope so, because that's news to me, and I'm not sure exactly how they would do it. The important point is exactly that this is where Venezuela gets its foreign exchange. The oil that goes to China and Russia is to pay back loans. They're not really getting cash for it. The United States, the exports to the United States are the main source of revenue from the oil sector.
I'm glad you brought that up. So, yes, where the U.S. is going to be pulling back other countries are going to step in. What are the implications when it comes to places like China and Russia and India? Charles?
Well, I'm in India right now, and I can tell you the newspapers here are reporting that there's going to be bargain oil from Venezuela. I mean, India imports oil, China imports oil. They need it. Russia does not. So how the markets will rearrange themselves presumably, and other countries will buy that oil, but to buy it at a discount because the transport costs, shipping oil to India, shipping oil to China is much higher than shipping oil across the Gulf of Mexico to Louisiana.
Diego, I'd like you to weigh in on that as well. What other countries benefit from these sanctions?
Well, what other countries are harmed by these sanctions was certainly Cuba. Cuba's main source of revenue at this moment is the export of professional services. And when I talk about the export of professional services, I mean not only medical doctors, as is broadly advertised, but intelligence, security operatives on the ground. So clearly, this would affect Cuba's main source of revenue, which is much higher than what they receive from tourism, from remittances. So Cuba would certainly have an impact on this. And following on what the ambassador have just said, Venezuela will be forced to allocate this oil in the market, but at a significant discount. And plus transport costs, it would certainly undermine their capacity to generate revenues and to keep up with public spending. And the most important thing, I think here, to keep the loyalty of the military and the police, of the security apparatus, which basically are the ones who are not only running the economy, but also the ones which are in control of containing civil unrest in a sort of perverse relation where the same people who control the economy, these same ruling elites, are the ones which are in charge of law and order and are the ones which unfortunately are repressing Venezuelans protesting in the streets, demanding free and fair elections.
Charles, I'm glad you brought up the military. We're going to come right back to that. But first, I want to go to Jairo. Your sister, my understanding, your sister is in Venezuela right now. What is she experiencing?
Well, all of my family, most of my family is in Venezuela. They're struggling. You have professionals who are trying to live with $10 a month. 800 people so far have been apprehended by the government. There are protesters in prison at the moment. Over 70 people killed since the 23rd of January from protests. So there's a dramatic crackdown on the normal people. And there's a humanitarian crisis. I was there last year. I went to the border with Colombia in the north with my cow. And you saw the lines, queues of thousands of people waiting to cross to Colombia, some of them walking to Peru, places like distance like Chile, on foot, just to escape from the humanitarian crisis that we have, which is, of proportions that the country never, ever experienced in its history.
Maduro, we played a little bit earlier of some of the comments he was making when he's telling the Venezuelan people that this is about the U.S. Taking our country from us. Are there people that will resonate with, Jairo?
Well, very few. Of course, the Chavismo has a stronghold of people who believe what the government said, who follow the media, the state-controlled media. The government has gone from a media that was very critical of him now to a media that is almost completely loyal to him or very censored. So a lot of, he still have a stronghold. I think it's a minority stronghold. Let's not forget that this crisis started in 2015 when the Venezuelan government under Maduro refused to recognize that the new power of the National Assembly, which was elected by the majority of people in Venezuela, and then created a superimposed National Constitutional Congress. It's like if the Prime Minister of Britain refused to recognize the parliament and then simply created a super parliament on top of them in a rigged elections in which that's where the crisis started, when you start ignoring the rules of law, the rule of law, and you don't accept the results that you lost. The Chavismo has lost huge ground, particularly its popularity has been tied to the oil revenue. And in a way, it's not new. In the 1970s, when Venezuela had a huge oil boom, well, certain parts of the politicians were very popular. And when the oil boom came down, they lost power in 96 when the oil came down. Venezuela has always been very dependent on oil, perhaps not as much as today, as dependent on oil. One of the problems is that Chavismo created all these social programs, which seem very good for many people outside because they seem that they were addressing poverty, but actually they did not solve the structural problems that create poverty. The levels of productivity were very low during Chavismo. Lots of nationalizations of companies were exacerbated the problem. Just to mention one example, when in 1998, when Chavez came to power, there were 8 or 9 companies that produce corn flour, which produces a particular food called arepa, which is central in the diet of the Venezuelans. There were 9 companies that produced. From those 9 companies, 7 were nationalized by the Chavismo, by the Chavez himself. 1 left, closed down, and there was only 1 left, which is the Polar, the private company.
Okay.
From the 7 companies that the government nationalized, not a single one is producing. Most of them are closed down. That's the origin of today's problem.
Diego, why has oil production dropped off so drastically over the years in Venezuela?
Well, this has been the direct result of widespread corruption and epic mismanagement, first with Chavez and then with Maduro. That's what has led to the current situation where oil production continues declining systematically. When Chavez came to power in 1999, oil production stood at 3.4 million barrels per day. 2 years ago, it stood at 2.4 million barrels per day. At the moment, as you referred briefly, it's around 1.2 million barrels per day and expected to go down at least 300,000 barrels per day. And again, this has been the result of widespread corruption and epic mismanagement. The old national oil company, PDVSA, at the moment is in the hands of the military. All its top management are active members of the military. And these are people who Maduro has granted power over the oil services, in control of ports, airports, imports of food and basic goods. These are the people who basically have profited from a complex patronage system of allocation of preferential dollars. And these same people, this high military command, which runs the economy, which runs the oil sector, some of these factions, not all, but some, are involved also in drug trafficking, fuel smuggling, illegal mining, and human trafficking. And obviously, these are the guys who currently continue supporting Maduro and are
so what incentive
becoming the main obstacle
what incentive
for a democratic transition in Venezuela.
What incentive do those people that you're talking about, that you're describing, what incentive do they have to turn on him?
Well, that's the main problem. They have little incentive to withdraw support from Maduro because they fear that not only the political and economic influence will be diminished, but also, more importantly, that they will be held accountable for corruption, for illicit activities. Again, I'm talking about drug trafficking, illegal mining, fuel smuggling, human trafficking, very serious crimes, and also of gross human rights violations in containing street protests, not only the current wave of protests, but also wave of protests in 2017, 2014, and daily protests which Venezuelans are staying because of shortages of food, of basic goods, because of the collapse of the whole system, because of the dismantling of vaccination programs, because of lack of water supplies, constant and frequent electricity blackouts, lack of gas, which is what most Venezuelans use to cook. And this is, again, what we've seen in Venezuela, that the stronger the protest, the stronger have been the repression by the police and the military. Now, I have to precise that these are the ruling elites from the high military command. But the rest of the armed forces, the middle rank, the rank and file, are suffering from the same problems as the rest of the Venezuelans. And these are the people which could make the difference, indeed, in the following days, especially if protests continue escalating, and if there continue being strong international support to restore constitutional and democratic order and to pave the way for a democratic transition. Because in the end, what Venezuelans want, what they're demanding in street protests in the streets, and what the international community is calling for, is for free and fair elections with an independent electoral authority, and with international observers.
So
that's all.
Okay,
which is
so
at
but
the table at the moment.
conditions you described have been happening in Venezuela for quite some time. And what National Security Advisor John Bolton said, he said it will make a big difference to the United States economically if we have American oil companies invest in and produce the oil capabilities in Venezuela. Charles, I'm going to put this question to you. How much of this is about democracy and human rights, and how much of it is just about U.S. businesses?
Look, U.S. business has been involved in Venezuela. U.S. oil companies have helped develop the fields for PDVSA, for Venezuela. Venezuela's oil supplies to the United States is, in statistical terms, less important as the United States is producing more and more oil. I don't think that's really the issue. I mean, what I can't read Bolton's mind. I don't want to read behind his words. But U.S. companies and the United States itself stand ready to help rebuild Venezuela. Your question earlier about the military, I mean, they have to be thinking twice now. I mean, it's not the United States alone that you're talking about. It's every major Latin American country, Canada, the European Union, collectively, UK, Germany, France, and Spain individually, Australia, probably more countries I can't list. But as said, if elections aren't called this week, they will withdraw recognition from Maduro. I mean, so these people have to be really concerned on the one hand about what's going on internationally, and on the other hand, by the economic crisis in the country, and at what point will that create the kind of chaos which is not necessarily going to hurt the generals, but where the junior officers and the enlisted troops take action against the generals.
Jairo, do you think that support for Guaido will continue to grow? Do you think that he has the means to galvanize his support?
I think it all depends on the next move. I will strike a note of caution here about saying, expecting that the military will immediately crack down. I mean, the military in Venezuela have been preparing for this moment for some time. And I'm not talking about military terms. I'm talking about, for example, developing the Arco Minero for Orinoco, which is a huge operation in the Amazons to produce, to extract gold and extract uranium and other minerals. This is completely controlled by America. It's an ecological disaster, but they're getting a lot of money from it. A huge amount of money are going illegally through that. There's it's been shipped at the moment. There's no control over this Arco Minero. And so the military has been preparing. Also remember that the Cuban intelligence forces, G2, are very present within the Venezuelan armed forces. And they have deeply penetrated the armed forces. So I will be cautious about expecting that the military will just crack up at the moment, or that there are being some of the military pronouncing themselves, but it hasn't been as widely accepted. Guaido is at the moment very popular because for a while, a lot of the hopes of the Venezuelans had been dissipated by the failure of the protests of 2017 to bring back democracy into the country. So Guaido came suddenly. One of the things which was very strategic when Guaido appeared is that it was not a very well-known leader, so the government was unable to demonize him as they have done, or imprison him as they have done with other leaders. So suddenly this guy appears. So at the moment he's still very, very popular. But Venezuelans, a lot of the Venezuelan opposition is very divided. A lot of them have been collaborating with the government, and that has to be recognized. So with Guaido, people can lose patience if they don't see change quick enough. And the Maduro government is playing with time, and that's in their favor, I think.
Okay, Diego, do you see Guaido being in a position to take this moment, to seize this moment, and gather more support?
Yes, absolutely. But first, I want to agree with what has been mentioned about the armed forces.
Okay.
The armed forces are one of the institutions which is more under surveillance, under espionage, not only by the Cubans, but also by the stronger counterintelligence military agency, DSM. So for them, it is very difficult to stage something or to support something different than the status quo of Maduro. And this means for the mid-ranks and the troops, the junior officers. So far, what we've seen is that mid-ranks discontent and insurrections, the mutiny we've seen, we saw on the 21st of January and years before, with the assault of barracks, of Captain Caguaripano and of rogue police officer Oscar Perez, has been that this discontent, that these actions have only served for the upper ranks to purge the armed forces from anti-Maduro and anti-Chavista ranks. And in general terms, what have been proving challenging for them have been that pure lack of coordination, pure communications, and lack of support of the upper ranks have made it very difficult for their actions to succeed, unless there is something that proves to have overwhelming support from all the mid-ranks. It's unlikely to succeed. And I think that's why all the international community is aligning efforts to try to, again, support Venezuelans to pave the way for a democratic transition in Venezuela. As for Juan Guaido is a fresh face within the Venezuelan opposition. He's very well respected by the Venezuelan moderates as a man of consensus, but he's also very well respected by the so-called radicals because he's part of the generation of 2007, which basically played a key role and an active role in joining the population, civil society, university students in street protests. So he's very well respected by moderates and radicals. But again, I think we have to be very clear that Guaido is a means to an end. Guaido basically has assumed the interim presidency of Venezuela, not self-proclaiming himself as wrongly the media has portrayed it, but basically in compliance with Article 233 of the Constitution, which says that basically when there's a power vacuum, the head of the National Assembly, in this case, Juan Guaido, needs to step in and call for elections. That's basically what happened after Maduro initiated a second term not recognized by the international community. Probably his 2013-2019 should have not also been recognized by the international community because there were also allegations of fraud.
Okay.
But in any case, there's no dispute that the 2018 elections were indeed the result of a fraud. So what I mean is, Guaido's aim is not to conduct a long-term government. His aim is basically to create the conditions for free and fair elections. And again,
okay,
yes.
let me bring in Jairo again. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that he is keeping all options on the table. That includes not necessarily ruling out some sort of military intervention. Would your family who's in Venezuela actually want something like that?
Well, I think they want back democracy, and I think this current situation is unsustainable. Nobody wants to get killed, and nobody wants to this end on violence. And sometimes I wonder, because I hear many voices in the U.S. calling the Trump administration to back off, and that's a legitimate call. However, I also want to hear those same voices calling for Maduro to back off. This situation can easily be solved by Maduro stepping down and calling for election and respecting the results of 2015, going back to legality. It's as simple as that. So I think what the majority of the Venezuelan people want, they want peace, but they also want to have a normal country, a country in which you actually can buy food, that you don't have to leave on foot and go all the way walking to Peru because you can't keep your family fed, your family in Venezuela. So I think I don't think it's a very helpful thing to create just a dichotomy between invasion or not invasion. You know, I think there's some interesting movements. Today, the Russian government, in a note, in a financial note, said they were expecting for Venezuela to honor its debts. Something that was very interesting because in this moment that is basically a coded message to say whoever comes afterwards will have to pay us what they owe, what Venezuela owes.
Sure.
So that's another discussion. But I don't think that the sense that when I was there in Venezuela is that the majority of the people want a restoration of democracy. The majority of the people want a compliance with the rule of law, and they want to have back a country in which you have a normal life. You have a normal life in which you don't have power cuts, in which you go to the supermarket and your salary is enough to buy enough food to feed you. So that I think is what Venezuelans want.
Okay, and that will be the final word. And thank you, and thank you for sharing with us what's going on with your family there. We really appreciate it. Thank you to all of you, Jairo, Lugo-Ocando, Charles Shapiro, and Diego Moya Ocampos. Thank you. Thank you for watching as well. You can see the program again anytime if you visit our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can join the conversation on Twitter as well. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Richelle, Carey, and the entire team. Bye for now.